Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to look at whether you should use marathon pace or marathon effort in the majority of your training. There are always lots of caveats with this, and it does depend on the type of run you're doing as well. So looking at you as an individual, this is the first thing you need to do. So are you an injury prone runner, in which case you probably need to be looking at marathon effort level most of the time, or if you're somebody who's pretty resilient to this and doesn't really get injured, then you could probably use marathon pace a little more frequently. It does depend on the type of run you're doing as well. So if you're doing a long run, you're probably going to be using non-carbon based shoes. So I would say you can probably go with marathon effort most of the time on that. Midweek sessions when you're maybe doing a tempo, you're doing lots of kind of longer stints or even some short stints at marathon pace or quicker, then yeah, absolutely fine. Probably to use your carbon shoes and to go towards marathon pace, because even if it's windy or hot or it's a slightly hillier route, you're not going to be battering your body as much during training because that carbon shoe is going to be assisting you in taking up some of that shock. So that's probably quite a good idea to then to aim towards marathon pace to get the best benefits you can. Ultimately, there are differences in the benefits you are going to achieve. If you're working at marathon effort the majority of the time, you're probably not pushing yourself quite as hard, your body's not having to work quite as hard, and your heart rate is going to be that little bit lower as well. So you may not get such fantastic results. However, they can be extremely good, as I find in my own training, by using this method. If you're looking to really reach for something, then yeah, absolutely need to be pushing those marathon pace sessions, kind of regardless to some degree of the conditions to a certain point if it's sensible. There are other things you need to think about as well. So looking at when are you training for the race? If you're training for a autumn marathon and you're looking at a summer training block where you're going to be running in very, very hot weather, again, I would maybe lean towards your marathon effort level. Your heart rate's going to be nice and high. Your body isn't going to be as taxed physically against the impact can be lower. Your muscle speeds aren't going to be as high, so your contraction force can be lower. So these all need to be factored in, and then maybe increasing the volume of your training or cross training a bit more as well. If you're training for a winter marathon, sorry, a spring marathon, and you're training through the winter with probably quite windy conditions a lot of the time, but it's also cooler, then again, there's a balance we had there in that you're running into headwinds a lot of the time, or certainly part of the time. So you're going to be running a lot harder than marathon effort to run your marathon pace. However, you're going to have the tailwinds, which will kind of balance out to some degree, or not completely. But also, you're running much cooler than you're probably going to be running when you run your marathon. So that marathon effort being pace wise instead is a really good idea. Now you can monitor this in different ways whether you work at pace or effort. Pace obviously is the pace, you're going to use your watch for that. If you're working at marathon effort level, then there's a few ways you can do it. You can look at the RPE scale, and there are a few variations of this. RPE standing for rate of perceived exertion, essentially how hard does it feel. Also, you can look at your heart rate. So if you're using a chest-based heart rate monitor, this is quite a good way to monitor that and essentially go, right, what's my marathon heart rate, or what have I achieved for a marathon previously, and then try and track towards that and go that, or maybe a fraction more if you're aiming to get quicker and fitter, then you can go like maybe 2 or 3 beats a minute more on average across those sessions. There are other things to consider as well about whether you're using a pack or not using a pack. If long running, you're using a hydration pack, that's adding probably a couple of kilos to you. That is going to have an impact and make it much harder to hold marathon pace. So you might drop it by 5 to 10 seconds a mile and run towards marathon effort level. Again, maybe taking longer repetitions at that because of it. But again, it can work out. There's lots of things to play around with it essentially in this. So there's a balance to this, and you can and should use both, but you need to find the right ratios that work for you as an individual. I wouldn't recommend always sticking to marathon pace, and I wouldn't always recommend sticking to marathon effort level. There's a sweet spot for you as an individual, your targets, the conditions, the timing, and everything else that you need to factor into your racing and to your training for your marathon. But it's worth considering and making deliberate choice of these, not just sticking to marathon pace because this is the pace I need to run. It is, but you also need to make sure you get to that race without injuries and make sure your training is top notch as much as possible, but sensibly and safely so. See you soon.